This is Left Voices for Tuesday, February 18th, 2014. I'm Andrea Sears. Tonight,
what Ethiopia did would have been just as illegal as if his next-door neighbor had done it. So the fact that this is a foreign state rather than an average American individual defendant honestly makes very little legal difference.
The NSA isn't the only one spying on Americans' computers. An American citizen living in Maryland is suing the Ethiopian government for infecting his computer with secret spyware, wiretapping his private Skype calls, and monitoring his entire family's use of that computer for several months. Kidane, a pseudonym used by the victim to protect his identity, is part of the Ethiopian community living in the United States. The spyware, a commercial product called FinSpy sold to governments around the world, was hidden in a Microsoft Word attachment sent by Ethiopian government agents and forwarded to the victim. Ethiopia is known to spy on perceived political opponents in the Ethiopian diaspora around the world, and it's far from the only country using FinSpy and other technology to spy on human rights and democracy advocates. The complaint, filed in U.S. District Court in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday by the Electronic Frontier Foundation, asks for a jury trial as well as damages for violations of the U.S. Wiretap Act and state privacy laws. Nate Cardozo, a staff attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, says the spyware was uncovered by Citizen Lab, a research group based at the University of Toronto in Canada.
They discovered that the Ethiopian government was running a command and control server for a particular kind of malware, the FinFisher line of products sold by Gamma International. And they also discovered a Trojan that included the client for this malware being circulated in the Ethiopian diaspora in the United States. And after that came to light, both Citizen Lab and some other independent security researchers investigated in the Ethiopian diaspora in the U.S., mainly around suburban Maryland, offered their services to inspect people's computers for malware, and one of those inspections was fruitful, and they found malware on our client, Mr. Kidane's computer.
What does this spyware do?
The spyware has a number of different capabilities. It essentially has full access to your computer if you get infected. So that means it can monitor your keystrokes, activate your webcam, activate the microphone, view files on the computer, view your email, record Skype calls without your knowledge, and send them back to the command and control server that is operating the infection. Pretty much anything that a authorized user could do on a computer, this malware can do as well.
And is there any protection? Is there a way to defend against the intrusion of this software or to find out if a computer is infected?
The FinFisher software is marketed as not being detected by any major antivirus suite, so antivirus is not going to help you. Practicing safe email hygiene, I think, is your best protection, not opening attachments from people you don't know. If you do need to open an attachment from someone you don't know, don't do it on your regular computer. Do it in a VM, do it in some sort of sandboxed computer that can't cause any harm. The way that our client got infected was he opened an email attachment, which it turned out was infected. So the standard disclaimers apply. Don't open attachments from people you don't know.
And those attachments can be virtually anything. It can be a photograph, it can be a Word document. It doesn't have to be what appears to be an executable file.
That's right.
The information being picked up by this computer was being sent to a server in Ethiopia. How do they manage to trace the origin of the spyware and the destination of the information that it intercepts?
The destination is hard-coded into the configuration file in the malware. So we know the IP address of the destination, and that's the command and control server running on a block of IP addresses owned by Ethio Telecom, which is the state ISP in Ethiopia. So we know that was the destination because it's hard-coded into the malware that was on Mr. Kadane's computer. We also know the infection vector because we have the original email that contained a Word attachment with the spyware loaded as a macro. So Mr. Kadane was forwarded this email, opened the attachment, and his computer was infected. So we have the original infection vector as well.
This spyware is commercially available to governments. How is it marketed?
So it's marketed by Gamma International, which is also, I believe, known as FinFisher GmbH, which is a UK and German company. And it's marketed as a lawful intercept tool. That's the sort of marketing jargon. And what that means is the various different FinFisher products can do all sorts of things, from wiretapping an entire ISP to installing malware on cell phones to things like what happens to Mr. Kadane. So FinSpy, which is the component of FinFisher that was used on Mr. Kadane, is marketed as, and actually the brochure is part of our complaint. The FinSpy brochure is Exhibit A to our complaint, which is linked on our website. So you can actually see the marketing materials. It's marketed all around the world except in the United States. So far as we know, it hasn't been sold to any U.S. law enforcement or intelligence agencies. And of course, if it's used pursuant to proper legal process, that's perfectly legal. However, it needs to be used pursuant to legal process, and that was not done here. Ethiopia did not get a U.S. warrant to wiretap or a U.S. wiretapping order to wiretap Mr. Kadane. They just went out and did it.
There was a lengthy article about this in the New York Times over the weekend, and my response to that article was to say that claiming the software is sold only for legitimate law enforcement purposes is like saying we sell guns only to kill bad guys. Is there any enforcement mechanism possible in a situation like this?
Absolutely. Privacy International, which is a UK-based NGO, filed a criminal complaint in the UK against FinFisher, against Gamma International, for the use of its product, not in Mr. Kadane's case, but in a separate case of an Ethiopian activist actually living in the UK. In England, their legal system allows private citizens to file criminal complaints, something that's not possible here in the U.S., and that's exactly what Privacy International did against Gamma. One of the nice things about that lawsuit is if we were to try and sue Gamma International, we might have difficulty obtaining what's called personal jurisdiction against them because they're not based here. Privacy International does not have that problem because they're issuing the complaint in the UK, which is where Gamma is based.
Is there any way to know what governments or law enforcement entities around the world have purchased this software and may be using it?
People are very tight-lipped about that. Gamma won't say, and very few governments will own up to it. We're indebted to Citizen Lab for their technical research, which shows a number of countries that we know to be using it. And the Citizen Lab report is, I think, Exhibit B to our complaint. So that lists a whole bunch of countries that use it. But that's empirical observation. No one has admitted to it, certainly not Gamma and certainly not any of the countries.
So what is your lawsuit charging?
Our lawsuit is a civil suit against the Federal Democratic Republic of Ethiopia on behalf of our client, Mr. Kadane, and it accuses Ethiopia of violating the Federal Wiretap Act and violating state privacy law. It's relatively simple, just two causes of action: wiretapping, because they intercepted Mr. Kadane's Skype calls without his consent, and intrusion upon seclusion, which is the state privacy law tort. And that just says they invaded his privacy in an unreasonable manner. What Ethiopia did would have been just as illegal as if his next-door neighbor had done it. So the fact that this is a foreign state rather than an average American individual defendant honestly makes very little legal difference here in this case.
So there is a process and procedure that applies to sovereign states as well as to private citizens.
There is. No sovereign state has ever been sued under the Wiretap Act, so this is going to be a first. But there's no reason why it shouldn't apply just as equally to Ethiopia as to a standard defendant. There's a process where you can sue foreign governments here in the United States, and that's under something called the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act. Foreign governments are not allowed to break the law with impunity here just because they're a foreign government.
So what is the remedy then?
We're asking for two different things. We're asking first and foremost for a declaration from the court saying what Ethiopia did was illegal. And then the second thing is we're asking for damages. Under the Wiretap Act, our client is entitled to either $10,000 or $100 per day that he was wiretapped, whichever is greater. And we're also asking for damages under intrusion upon seclusion. But this case is not about money for the client. This case is about vindicating his rights to not be spied on.
Nate Cardozo is a staff attorney with the Electronic Frontier Foundation based in San Francisco, California. This has been Left Voices for Tuesday, February 18th, 2014. Join us again tomorrow for more news and information from a progressive perspective. I'm Andrea Sears for leftvoices.net.